Welcome again, and thank you for joining us in today's webinar, From Messy to Measured, Making Sense of the Tour Carbon Footprint. Like I just said before, for those coming in, please introduce yourself in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can leave them in the Q&A, and we will address them towards the end of the conversation that we're going to be having here today. So let's start by first imagining a tour. Let's say a group of people fly from various different destinations, long haul destinations, and they get to the airport, they get picked up by a minivan, and they go sleep in a local bed and breakfast. The next day, they get picked up again. They go to a snorkeling trip, kayaking, maybe a little bit of sailing, and just enjoy the day at the beach. And they go to a local, say, family-owned restaurant and enjoying a beautiful, local paella. And finally, they buy some souvenirs from a local handicraft store. So that's, one day in the life in, someone in a small tour group. So every part of that journey, from the jet fuel to the ingredients of the paella, actually creates an emission. So, but where does the operator's responsibility really begin and really end? And how do you measure those moving pieces across many different operations that may sometimes be outside of your control? So this is what we're going to unpack today. We're going to help move from confusion to clarity and so begin to try to understand how to start to measure your tour carbon footprint, how to really relate those carbon emissions to the supply chain, and how to turn that data into meaningful action. So I'm Paloma Zapata, CEO of Sustainable Travel International, and for the better half of nearly 2 decades, I've worked with destinations and operators around the world, supporting them in their sustainability journey with a very strong focus on helping them measure, manage, and reduce their climate impact. And so what I've been experiencing in this process is that it can feel daunting at first, but with the right tools, with the right mechanisms, with the right approach, it can become a source of clarity and of course confidence moving forward. So today we have 2 inspiring leaders who are going to show us through their experience how to overcome these challenges. So Krista, welcome, co-CEO of Cheesemans Ecology Safari, who has built on the company's conservation ethos by measuring the carbon footprint of every single tour and communicating carbon neutrality with transparency and storytelling. Kasia Morgan, welcome, Sustainability Director of Exodus Travel, who has spearheaded initiatives such as trip-level carbon labels and integrated sustainability practices across one of the most established names in adventure travel. So before we dive in, please answer this quick poll that we're going to put up on the screen very quickly, just to help us understand where you are in relation to your carbon footprinting journey. So just take a quick minute to just answer this, and it will just give us a little bit of insight. And then we're going to dive right in. Well, good thing no one so far says they're not planning to do it. So this is a good trend. Okay, well, thank you for answering. I think, oh, we still have the poll up. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is really good. So we have a good percentage, about 26%, that are already measuring, and then other that are not, but they want to. So this is the perfect conversation that we're going to be having today to help ease that sort of daunting experience and help you move forward with a carbon footprinting. So one thing that I've learned is that data doesn't do the job alone. It doesn't really drive change, but people do, right? So, when I was first drawn, talking about my experience into sustainable tourism, I come from the country of the Dominican Republic, where that's where my family is from. And I grew up with pristine beaches, beautiful environment, culture. And I saw how the destination actually became known to the world and became a known tourism destination for better or for worse. So what inspired me really is thinking about how can this model be enhanced? How can it be better to really protect communities and to protect the environment, that makes these places so special, especially those, that one place that is close to my heart, which is the Dominican Republic. And I've seen, how tourism can be at times, devastating to the destination. So that's my inspiration and how I came to, lead this space in sustainable tourism. And I would love to hear from our, speakers today is what really inspire you to connect personally with sustainable travel, to really work in this field and to create positive impact in the work that you do. So, Krista, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Paloma, for that really nice grounding introduction. And, for me, what it is about for connecting is I've always had a lifelong love of wild places and wildlife. And I ended up, I studied ecology. So it was about they're part of the ecosystem. And so there's so much there that works in a cyclical manner. And then with travel over uh, years, I've seen some of places that I've gone where there's been impacts of climate change with glaciers reducing in size, et cetera, or changing dynamics, population dynamics for the wildlife populations, some of which are attributable to human impacts, including climate change. So that's just always driven it for me, realizing and recognizing there's that responsibility for future generations in all the work that we do, but including with our travel and the trips that we organize at Cheesemans Ecology Safaris. And I've been with Cheesemans for a few years. My partner's been with Cheesemans for almost 2 decades. Cheesemans itself around for 45 years and has seen the founders saw that change in populations and wildlife populations and the ecosystems as well, and had a commitment very early on in the very early days of carbon neutrality of like, what could we do to reduce our carbon footprint and or our impacts, because there's just that recognition of the places are so precious and we do want to preserve them as much as possible for the future generations.
Absolutely. It's incredible that we have seen in our lifetime the changes. They're really in our face. And yeah, we need people to take action. So, Kasia, what personally inspires you and to connect, positive impact to travel?
Well, I think, like many of us who work in travel, it's having had the privilege to see these wonderful places around the world and the communities that live within them, wildlife that lives within them, as Krista, you spoke about so compellingly. And I think it's just that the sense of travel as a privilege, and it's not an entitlement. And sadly, there are many who can't enjoy the travel that some of us have been blessed to be able to do. And so I think along with that privilege comes a sense of responsibility that I guess I'm inspired by that sense that we have an opportunity really to kind of travel in a way which obviously leaves us in a better place, but also leaves the places that we visit in a better place. I'm also really compelled by this idea of a win-win, actually. So I'm late to the travel sector. I joined Exodus 6 years ago. That was my first experience of working in the travel sector. And what I love about the idea of thinking about how a travel business can be purpose-driven is that actually if one of our customers goes on holiday with us and is immersed in local communities and local environments and has that incredible experience that we know they can have in doing that, but also knows that they're giving back to the places they visit, they come back with an even more enhanced experience. They come back wanting to do that kind of trip, that kind of adventure again. So it's this wonderful win-win, which I think is compelling both personally, but also from a business point of view.
Absolutely. No, that's great starting points, for everyone. There is always that, that's the beginning, having that drive to make an impact, to make change. But that's again just the beginning. So, sometimes, in my work, through my experience, I hear, over and over people say, I know I need to do something. I just don't know where to start, like it's just daunting, and how do I know if I'm going to do it right? So these are the sort of things, that I hear a lot of times. Sometimes they just don't have the resources to put in. And it just, again, it feels like a roadblock. But the truth is, that everybody starts with this apprehension, but everybody, if we all take baby steps, then it's a matter of like really creating a snowball effect. So Krista, you started this process, with Cheesemans and Kasia as well. You've gone on this journey for several years as well. So I want to hear about that experience, when you first started. So, Krista, you've been doing this for a couple of years now. And what was easier than expected? What was the most challenging part of starting? And does it feel different now that you've done it now for the second year in a row?
Yes, it has. And so Cheesemans did start with its own project almost, well, over 2 decades ago. And that's because in some of the early trips to the Antarctic, they're already starting to see some of those effects of climate change I mentioned with glaciers or with icebergs and the amount of snow cover that was happening or not happening. And so because of that, they started a carbon offset project, which was about having donations go to protecting vital habitat, specifically forest. And over time, and with the evolution and growing understanding of the complexities of how to do carbon offsets well, we began to recognize that we would like to also grow and expand that program into something with the growing complexities of understanding that. We also recognize we didn't necessarily have a capacity to do that. We are a very small staff, and it is a field unto its own, and we wanted to make sure we were doing it right. So for us, what was great with partnering with Sustainable Travel International is that we got to basically ride on your coattails of the research that you do and the in-depth process that you do, and feel confident because of the transparency that was set up. And then you worked with us pretty extensively for the last few years. So we're able to put information out on our web pages, but then in behind the scenes, working with your carbon calculator, et cetera, and that's more developed specific to work with the business and the various types of trips we have and the various types of travel, of hotel accommodation, of live aboard boats, et cetera. So that was really beneficial for us in order to have the approach that encompassed that complexity.
Sorry, that was my cat. Yeah, thank you. No, it's been, actually, great to work with you on enhancing the tool and giving you more insight, so that you can see every single trip, carbon footprint, and making it, easier for you to fully understand the differences in those in the trip carbon footprint. And so Kasia, what about, your experience? What hurdles did you face in the data gathering? And then even tell us a little bit more about these carbon labels.
Yeah, sure. There's no way of getting around the fact that this can feel completely mind-boggling. Krista, as you said, it's a kind of whole world of its own, this world of how you, first of all, collect the data and then aggregate it and then convert it. I think we have felt and still continue to feel all those hurdles and challenges at times. The level of accuracy we want to get in the data we're collecting, how we go about converting that, or again, in our case, we're lucky enough to work with a consultancy, how they go about converting that and what choices are being made there, and then how you might choose to communicate that, and all while getting your team involved along the way. I think what we found is pragmatism is vital. So really actually not feeling like you have to take everything on at once, and not feeling like you have to get to perfect or indeed anywhere near perfect. I think what I found is in this industry, and indeed cross industry, there is a huge amount of mutual support and forgiveness for mistakes or for not getting it quite right. It's kind of really hard to put a foot truly wrong if you're trying to find the right way forward. So to give you an example, at Exodus Travels, when we first started trying to measure our trips, and there were 400 of them, we took just six trips which we felt best represented our different categories of trip. and we quite simply try to measure the different kind of key aspects of those trips in terms of the carbon emissions being created, accommodation, travel, and any activities at that point. And then we were able to multiply them out according to how many passengers travelled on each category of trip. And you know what? That was a great place to start. Since then, we have built out a process for measuring each trip. But again, the level of complexity you want to and are able to go to is always a decision. I would say in terms of, again, engaging a team, what has helped is we established for a few years to help us with that initial trip measurement, what we called our low carbon lab. So members of our product team who were designing our trips, who would come together, once every few weeks and we figured out together, how are we going to get hold of this data? What are we going to do? How do we then start thinking about decarbonisation? And I think there's lots of great case studies out there of other companies and the way they've done it, the way they've made those first few steps, but inevitably everyone has started small and simple and then kind of built from there. And I think that's been really key on our journey, is not trying to take on too much too quickly.
Exactly. No, that's perfect. And so, moving forward a little bit deeper into this specific, challenge, there's sometimes some gray areas in determining who's responsible for what, right? So, for example, booking the flights. Sometimes travelers book their own flights. Sometimes there are flights within a journey. Sometimes you subcontract, a service, obviously. So, how do you approach, those boundaries? What have you learned, along the way, so that you don't necessarily, for example, either duplicate or, make sure that who owns that responsibility? How do you limit that? So this is a question for both of you. So, whoever wants to take this on first.
Go ahead, Kasia.
I guess we start with GHG protocol, which is kind of like the framework and the guidance, I guess, for how you do carbon accounting, carbon reporting really well. And that gives some good guidelines on actually how much you should be reporting as part of your emissions and how much you can leave out of your own report. So, for example, Paloma, you talked about the flights that you sell versus the flights that your customer might book to get to your trips. GHG protocol would say that you only need to report for and measure the ones that you sell. Now, outside of that, there is the option for voluntary reporting, and increasingly we're seeing travel companies decide to report more and more outside of what they are required to from a regulatory point of view. For example, trying to measure the impact of their non-sold flights, and that's obviously really admirable as well, because it's you're a kind of what you might call an induced or life cycle emission for your trip. It's worth remembering that, your scope 3 will always be someone else's scope 1. So there is inevitably kind of overlap and double reporting built into the system. And actually, duplication is no bad thing. We're better to kind of over-report and over-account for our carbon. So I would say, we found it okay to kind of let ourselves off the hook, to not get too caught up. As long as we're reporting, certainly within our boundaries. If we go a bit further and there's a bit of double counting somewhere, that's no bad thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And Krista, what has been your experience?
So I think I'll speak to that as it relates to working with STI and the dashboard, because for us, we know that you are doing that work in behind the scenes, that you have developed a dashboard that is based on best practices and the current research, and that you will modify that as time goes on, as necessitated by ongoing research. And so we know that that has been based on, like as Kasia was mentioning, GHG protocols, et cetera. And then within that, for us, we can look at, types of trips and our activities as well, then to be gauging, what we're doing, how we're doing it. And going forward, if we think about, as we develop trips, some of those decisions we make as we talk to our in-country operators as well, and letting them know about the responsibilities that we are trying to take with the trips as we develop. And it does sort of have a interactive educational effect with the operators because of the questions that we are asking. And then conversely, or as well with our clients, they are appreciative of the fact that we are trying to do those best practices with the climate offset projects that we're selecting through STI with the dashboard data, and as we can be able to present that, whether we're looking at the share of activity by year or the types of activities, et cetera. So we get a little bit more down into those details, recognizing that STI is taking care of the higher level details and the quality of the data that we are submitting to you, and then with the interaction, trying to refine that.
Exactly. That's one thing that we've been doing. It's refining, some of the data. For example, there was a trip that you may have done through, we had the factors for cruise, but then we looked at there was actually more of a liveaboard or like little details like that. And then
Right.
you could continue further defining that, I'm glad to hear they're saying it also affects what questions you ask to your supplier. So this is, an ongoing learning experience. And one thing about the flights, so the flights that you don't book through your trips, what you're doing is you're using, our calculator for the individuals themselves to go ahead and measure the flights that they purchase outside of the trip. So you're creating also an opportunity for the individuals themselves to be able to measure and then take responsibility for those,
Right.
particular flights. So the
Yeah.
idea here is that yes, the flights that you don't book are not part of your, scope 3, but those that you do book are those activities that you book, like the hotels, the local flights within the journey, your transportation, all of those are included in your scope 3 measurement.
They are. And the other thing we do is, of course, as we let clients know with our materials about that carbon offset, we invite them to offset their flights themselves. And
Exactly.
just having that gentle invite in our materials has definitely resulted in people doing that. And they've let us know that they're appreciative of the fact that we asked or invited them, and they let us know about what they do. So there is a carryover effect that way without us being necessarily like really dogmatic about it, as much as being setting an example and encouraging.
Absolutely. So, again, one question that I think, maybe Kasia touched upon is, how accurate does it really need to be? No? And pragmatic versus, accuracy. And especially now that we're in the starting point, we're in the starting point of this net zero journey where, measurement is a big part, but we're going to be learning and we can make mistakes along the way, and we can use that to identify gaps and where we need to focus, our efforts. So again, the goal isn't to be perfect from the beginning. You can spend hours and on end, just, trying to that perfection to the 0.0.5 decimal point. But it's really about building that foundation that can be reliable. It can be, again, create that template so that you can improve, moving forward, just like we were saying, with Krista, we've been fine tuning, is it, you can ask the questions. Was that an EV, a minivan, or were you using biodiesel in your boat fleet? Like you start asking then those additional questions, further and furthering and enhancing the accuracy of your carbon measurement tools, And so, for example, we have a measurement, for example, year 1 with methodology 1, and then there's an enhancement, and then there's year 2 with the methodology. And so you have an understanding, and you have sort of like also let's say an analysis of how the different changes and how you've included your additional accuracy. But I want to, I learn a little bit more, Kasia, of what you guys are doing in your data collection. You mentioned, a little bit about using these examples, trips. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about, rolling out this measurement at scale and what you're doing as the years move forward? How are you enhancing this approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. It's a constant balance
Mhm.
because ultimately you want enough accuracy in your carbon data that when you start to take action to decarbonize aspects of your trips, tours, holidays, whatever, you can actually see the impact of those, but not so much that you're all going to keel over or spend all your time trying to measure the finer detail of the carbon, as you said,
Mhm.
Paloma, because then you've got no time left for the actual stuff, which is the decarbonization that you're trying to, you're using the data for in the
Exactly.
first place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we've certainly learned that it is indeed an ongoing process of, the data availability evolves and the accuracy of the data evolves. Then all the kind of sciencey bit with, those conversion factors that enable you to convert raw data into carbon emissions. That's constantly evolving and changing and has an impact. And then, of course, methods for calculating as well. So I guess what to kind of give you some more insight into what we do at Exodus, we don't actually reach out to any of our DMC suppliers on the ground
Mhm.
for our trip carbon data. So
Mhm.
although now we do have a measurement for each of our trip itineraries, we've rolled it out from those 6 trips. We actually, rather than reaching out to our suppliers and trying to get kind of actual data on how much fuel was consumed when you took the
Mhm.
customers from the airport to this or whatever, we're able to, because those itineraries are repeated, figure out what a normal transfer looks like, which kind of accommodation are they in for this trip, what kind of activity are they doing, and then again, in our case, with the help of our consultancy, figuring out what the kilometers are like, what the emissions footprint is like for that kind of hotel, etc. So again, it's only ever an approximation, to be honest. I
Mhm.
noticed a
Mhm.
couple of questions about, bespoke tailor-made travel, and hopefully we can come to that at the end because one of our sister companies is dealing with that. We're lucky in that we have these itineraries that repeat. Over time, what I hope we can start to do is replace some of that proxy data with actual data. And exactly as you've said, Paloma, when we can start to swap in, well, our proxy assumption is that this is a diesel car, and that this 4-star hotel is not running on renewable energy.
Right.
We start to find out that actually, this does generate its own renewable energy, or this is an EV transfer. We can start to draw that in and see those kind of carbon emissions for that particular trip more accurately reflected, and hopefully lower than we initially thought. So better to start with a proxy that assumes kind of, I suppose, business as usual and no
Exactly.
particular initiatives, and
Yeah.
then go from there.
Absolutely. And Krista, well, I have a question for you, but I think you were about to were you about to say something?
Well, I was going to say that
Yeah.
that again, there's sort of the example of how we use various sorts of vessels for different activities,
Mhm.
and whale watching might be one of them. And as we keep track of what others are doing, I saw that there's now a new EV whale watching boat out in the Azores, and that's the first ever. And to let all of our whale watching partners know about that, because I know there are a few where we live locally that are looking at how they can improve upon their emissions, and if they're thinking of modifying. And so I do agree with what Kasia said in that, don't let, I'll paraphrase, but don't let perfection be the enemy of progress here. Like,
Yes.
get going on this and
Yeah.
start and do it with some of your trips. And even though you don't have the all the information, there are good proxies and they're getting better. And then as you do develop the data for your trips, or working with a company like STI that does, or an organization like STI that does, then you'll be able to keep building on that and refine. And I can say that that refining that you've done with us has been very effective for us, because it actually hasn't taken that long once you have the data in there. And I would just encourage people just to get started because of that. With everything they're hearing from us, I think that's sort of a message that we're trying to get across.
Excellent. So that just kind of leads also to the next question that I had, which has been, once you started this process, what has been the most surprising thing that you discovered about your tour emissions?
I mean, I've been thinking about it as, is it surprising or not? But it was certainly that the largest amount of emissions are coming from the vessels or the larger flights, the
Mhm.
larger planes.
Yeah.
And a lot of the data out there does say it depends on the size of the vessel, the type of the or the gasoline or diesel, et cetera, what it's using, how it's using, how much it's using, how many people. So it probably wasn't surprising per se, but to see it mapped out across our trips and summarized across our trips, it's like, okay, like what can we do in this area? And we've already are looking at, does that mean that we work with operators that are, and have already modified their fleet? Or as other and some larger companies are doing, are modifying their fleet, that will then probably create opportunities for smaller operators to piggyback on that,
Yeah.
that more vehicles will become available for sale as used vehicles, et cetera, to improve on whatever is out there and is being used for transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if, like, we would have seen the EV boat in the Azores, before, or like, does it made you think when you looked at it, it's like, oh, how will that affect my carbon footprint? Did you think about that?
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And to talk about it with some of our local partners,
Yeah,
as it relates to
exactly.
what are they planning for their fleet, as it were.
Exactly. No, no, amazing. So, again, and then something that I've noticed as well, in my experience is sometimes, the operators may feel a little bit apprehensive about sharing the emissions data. How is it going to be taken? Is it going to be criticized? What if it's again not perfect, So, this is again, over and over. People don't know exactly, what to do, with this data, how to, really talk about how they're how what they're doing, and how not, so that they're not greenwashing. No, but then they can fall into the green hushing, which is basically not talking about the things that they're already doing. So, in my experience, I think, transparency does build trust, and even though the number is a work in progress, but again, it should not stop progress, even if you don't have that accuracy. So, Krista, well, both of you, I want to know about, how you're communicating your carbon neutrality. And Kasia, I want to know about those, those eco label tools, and other ways that you're communicating, sustainability. So, either one of you can start. So, Kasia, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting one. When we first were talking about labeling our trips, carbon labels, putting the carbon value, which we do per person per day on each of our kind of trips on the website. It was a few years ago, and there was a lot of, flurry of media coverage in all kinds of different products and services, carbon labeling. And we had this optimistic view that it wouldn't be long before that was, one of the pieces of information that a consumer was definitely looking out for when they went shopping for holidays or anything else. To be honest, that hasn't kind of transpired in that way. I think where those carbon labels are useful is only as a signpost and a signal. As you say, Paloma, in that kind of journey of building trust, of trying to show transparency and accountability, and a nod for the consumer to the fact that the customer that we are kind of thinking about this thing, our carbon impact, that we're measuring it, and so on. I think what's more exciting and interesting to me, and what we think is more compelling to the customer, is talking about what it actually means for their trip, their adventure, their interaction with local communities and their experience. And we've recently run some customer surveys that again show us loud and clear that although sentiment around sustainability with a big S, this siloed, messaging around sustainability and decarbonisation that can be filled with jargon and quite guilt-laden, sentiment has reduced. It's not seen as important, etc. What remains very high is a sense that our customers want to see us acting in areas such as local social impact, restoration of nature, reduction of waste. It's the stuff they experience and see and feel on their holidays. And so actually we couch our carbon management and messaging around that firmly within our, we call our wider plan, our Thriving Nature, Thriving People plan. And we're very much talking about focusing on things like the conservation and restoration of the natural world, or, again, empowerment of social, of local communities. So it's a wider story about climate and nature resilience and social resilience, and that it feels like that lands a lot better with our customers. It's the kind of things that they're looking out for. It's the kind of things that can ultimately kind of enhance their experience when traveling.
Absolutely. It makes so much sense. I mean, in the end of the day, carbon emissions, it's so, kind of theoretical, you can't really see it, but it brings me back to our original stories, what inspires us, right? So this is what people want to see. They want to be inspired. They want to see that, whatever they're doing is going to have a positive impact. So that's, it's interesting, this experiment that you did and the experience that you're gaining from it. And so Krista, how has been your experience? Because you're also communicating, how your, how your tours are carbon neutral in a way that feels, credible to the travelers. You're using data visualization, with some of the tools that, we are working together with. But I just want to know, what are your experience in using in communications, and how has that resonated with your travelers?
Well, what Kasia said is similar in to aspects of what we've learned. We did not do labeling of our trips in the same way. We put out and do have, web page and talks about conservation and the various countries that we go to, and highlighting specific local conservation projects that we are supporting by working with various nonprofits, et cetera, within country, and that could be with our guides have put us in contact with, or that we know that the various providers in the area are working with, that we're working with them and that's supporting them. And so it really is coming down to people feeling connected to where they're going. And they always come back, and the stories that we hear from our evaluations, they really loved visiting the local conservation project and hearing about that, and knowing that they were supporting aspects of that we had called out, like try to think about reducing your plastic use. And they will be mentioning that, like, well, we saw that at the hotel, or we'd like the hotel to consider that more. So they're actually also giving us a little bit of on the ground truthing for us then to work and come back around with the operators, which is wonderful. And so having that connection and them feeling connected with the company that is trying to do this and trying to put our best foot forward, and getting the information to them has been very important as part of our journey for getting the information out to them and communicating the impact that we're having. And what I think is important is combining the science with the storytelling for people to feel that connection, and the message can resonate so much more for them that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That really is what drives people, in the end of the day. But, this is a conversation and a journey towards, again, understanding your footprint so that we can, as a collective, really turn things around in this space, so, beyond, how they're communicating, or how the say travelers, are responding, to the actual measurement in itself, right? So it shouldn't be a detractor. It's definitely part, of your action agenda and what you're doing, and it helps you make those decisions, right? By having the data, it helps you, makes you write the right decisions and then build the right story. So, looking ahead, now that you've built, these tools that you have now, and that, again, it's a continuous journey that we're going to continue enhancing and perfecting and getting better numbers and better data. But now you have that data, you have the first starting point. So so now, where is that exciting work? What's next, as far as, like, innovation, and where does this, what's the starting point? So, like, Kasia, what do you see as the biggest opportunities, in the short term, maybe in the medium term, in order to start, reducing, your carbon footprint in the next few years?
So we've taken quite some time to find the right tool, way, etc., of inputting all of that trip detail and then getting those carbon values out. So we think we've got there, as you've said, always more work we can do on that. But what we want to do in the kind of 6 months ahead is actually get all of our product team, the guys designing our trips, putting in that data themselves, not only for their existing trips, but importantly for new trips. So before they launch a new trip, when they're still in the process of design, inputting the aspects of the trip into our kind of essentially our kind of carbon calculator, so that they can actually see while designing it where the kind of heavier carbon aspects are, where there might be opportunities to switch out modes of transport or possibly different hotels, whatever it might be. And in that way, we hope to kind of further engage and equip our product team more widely, give them a sense of ownership over the carbon footprint of their trip, and find opportunities that someone with their sustainability hat on themselves might not be able to find in the same way that someone who's designing the trip will be able to find. We think that woven into the new trip design, there's particularly opportunity, as we've talked about before, in transport and accommodation. And then we're also looking at how we can further promote train travel to our trips. We've got a lot of UK customers that go to Europe with us. So again, how can we make it really nice and easy and appealing for them to travel by train to and from our trips? So those are a couple of kind of opportunity areas for us, I think.
Well, that's very exciting. Sometimes just may not necessarily, just a little tweak, right?
Yeah.
Can make a big difference. So no, that's super exciting to put it in the hands of those that are actually, building those trips, so we can make more climate friendly trips that are engaging and that are still add value, right? So that's, the bottom line. So so Krista, what is next? What is the next besides your EV boat trip for scaling that, across the board? What is exciting? What is next for you in your journey?
So we're, again, small company. So, but it is similar in that as we develop our trips, we now have the dashboard and the tool, and we can be putting in the factors of the different components of the trip while we're developing it to get an idea of what the carbon emissions will be like, and then the working that into our budget as well for the carbon offset funds that we want to work in, and that really helps immensely to save us time. To have it is very easy to use, and then we can be conveying that out after as to what is the carbon emissions and the carbon offsets for a trip. And again, that's educational for our staff, but as well for the clients. And then for if other operators are looking at that, we're doing that. Maybe we're setting an example, showing them that it can be doable and possible. I would like to also, with each passing year, be able to think about how we're positioning ourselves with those trips to try to be more intentional and make the intentional choices. And that is, maybe it's hypothetical at this point, but maybe not when it comes to, can you have an EV boat? So I know that there's a lot of challenges with developing EV boats, because actually they're looking at developing one locally here. That's why it's always of interest. I live near the ocean, and there's a company that's trying to do that for having an EV boat offshore. So there are definitely hybrid boats, but then a big one as well, as all of us from small company to large travel company is working on this, is interested in it and maintains that interest and that impetus. Then a big area is some of those really large areas like airline fuel, what's being used and what the airlines are developing to keep them with their eye on that target of reducing their emissions. Because that is a big part of it. We all recognize that. We recognize that's the responsibility that comes with that privilege of travel, as Kasia started with. And there's sort of a tipping point with a lot of voices together can really make a difference.
That's a very good point. Absolutely. And it's a long journey for the airlines. It's a whole shift. We can take a whole nother,
I know, I recognize that. I'm throwing a big one out there.
No, but it's a really strong point, because that is an area that we need to, not forget about and continue to, to support the airlines, to be more more fuel efficient.
I mean, there's a model of the different levels of
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
It bottom to top and top to bottom.
Exactly, exactly. There's only so much, right, that we can do. But we should be doing, those baby steps. But yes, we need the infrastructure, to change when it comes to jet fuels, and that will be have huge effects. But before taking on the questions, I just want to, one final, ask for both of you is if you could leave one message for the operators, where to start. Everyone who's listening now, what's your advice, and on the starting point, so that they can maybe get away from that, that apprehension and that fear.
Start now. It's very possible. It's very relatively easy with some of the tools that are out there, and very usable tools that are easy to access to get to, or to have the partnership. I think it is something that if you start planning, and even just with a few trips, as Kasia mentioned, that was a great starting point for them. You don't have to have every detail. You don't have to have that perfection in place. That working with a partner like Sustainable Travel International, a credible organization, gives you much more breadth and capacity to do that work. Knowing that it's grounded, like that your work is grounded in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is part of then there's projects that get chosen with those carbon offset funds, and the importance of those, you can see you have a range of projects, and that can be very inspiring for clients to know that their funds are going towards projects that are within the country that they're going to. That it is working on, we do go to the Dominican Republic, and that there's a Larimar wind farm in the Dominican Republic, and that it's actually also doing local education, and that it's inspiring youth to get involved in renewable energy. And that is an important part of it that you'd be conveying out just by starting with a few trips and a few projects that you're funding. You're able to convey that impact, and that can then grow as you just add to it. And so you can identify maybe where your biggest impacts could be, and making the choices that matter by partnering with a company that is doing that behind the scenes work. And as I keep trying to go, like, that progress comes from building the momentum, not just waiting for everything to feel perfect.
Absolutely. No, and I think what you're also saying is that, not only do you need to understand your carbon footprint, work on your supply chain, your carbon footprint, but there's more that you can do. You can also give back and support climate change in the bigger picture by supporting these, climate initiatives, climate projects like renewable energies and forest restoration and restoring carbon sinks like mangroves. There's a lot that we can do, because even if you stop carbon emissions today, there's still a lot of carbon emissions out there that we need to sequester and, to basically able to stop the climate change and, crisis that we're in today. So there's definitely a lot that we can do starting today, like you said. And Kasia, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Krista put it so well. And I was reflecting on the title of this webinar, From Messy to Measured, which I love. And I would just say, remember that to a certain extent, bits of it will always feel a bit messy. And I think that's part of the point. So echoing Krista's point, don't wait for it to be perfect, get going on something. And it's okay if bits of it continue to kind of feel a bit messy as we all figure all of this out. And then again, to your point about the wider story, I would really recommend you thinking about the wider framework for your climate action. What is the story for you? What is the purpose or the why of, why you even want to start measuring and reducing your carbon? Figure out what that story is, what that framework is, and that will really then help you to engage your staff and your colleagues on the journey, to engage and speak to your customers about it, and ultimately, hopefully, help you better make it work for your business as well as for your kind of sustainability goals.
Absolutely. Well, before we break, we have some questions from the audience that we want to address. So the first one here, I'd like to know where to start if every single one of your trips is bespoke. We calculate and offset flights, but we are having difficulty getting beyond that and cannot afford a consultant. So we are a tour operator, so book all elements in the bespoke package for individual flights, accommodation, transfers, and activities. So anyone want to take that? I have something to add is there as well, but anyone want to take that?
We've got in our wider group, we've got a couple of sister companies that have been trying to do just this, that again, book bespoke travel. And I guess there's kind of two potential approaches. One is taking something that represents the itineraries, you know, again, a bit like our initial approach, a few representative itineraries. So in, you know, a given destination, there might be, you know, 2 or 3 itineraries that best represent what most customers are doing. Another approach is taking almost like the jigsaw pieces of your trips and measuring the carbon of each of those, so that every time you want to measure the overall carbon of a particular trip, you can just pull in those jigsaw pieces. And the other thing I would say is, don't feel you have to measure everything. So you can take either of those approaches and just apply that to your, you know, kind of multiply that effect out across all of your passengers, but only measure for your top 20 representative itineraries or whatever. So again, I would just say use that pragmatism and don't feel like you have to measure every aspect of every bespoke trip you design. But Paloma, I feel like you guys are the experts in this, so I don't know whether you would agree.
Right. No, I agree, you know, as well. I mean, we do have free tools so that you can measure their trip, you know, carbon footprint. So it can be free. But I understand that when you're doing it and you want to measure it and you want to give it to your client, you know, right away, you know, that does create a detractor if you have to go in. And even if it's a free tool, you do have to, you know, put that information. We are working, maybe I'm speaking ahead, but we're working on an AI tool to make this a lot faster. And you just like, you know, provide the data without having to like input all of it all over again. And then you can get that data, you know, right away. But again, it's the perfectionism, right? It doesn't have to be, you know, exactly the same. You can also have those proxies. We also have another approach that basically adds a percentage as well, you know, based on, you know, let's say the number, the destination. So there's different ways that you can do, you know, to measure. But I would start by using our free carbon footprinting tool to try to understand, you know, the basis of an average trip, and you can have that as a starting point. And I can take another one unless Krista, you want to add anything to that?
The only other thing is early on, I think, and I don't know if it's still an opportunity, but where you just have a base amount that you add to the trip, a certain percentage, like 1%.
Yeah,
Take the
like
1%.
1%.
Yep. And then just add that to the trip. And then you know you're being generous, and that's great.
Yeah.
But it probably averages out across trips.
It pretty much averages. The 1% works, you know, kind of well. And for us, it's like if you don't add the long haul flight, it'll probably be less. And if you add the long haul flight, and depending on where you're coming from, it might be a little bit more than 1%. But a 1% is a great average, you know, to kind of figure that out. So the next question is, so hello, I'm joining from Tanzania, so welcome. And here our communities play a direct role in protecting nature, from conserving wildlife to safeguarding our environment. Yet, when we speak about sustainability, so much of that focus is placed on emissions and supply chains. My question is, how can we create a framework that measures not only carbon, but also the positive impact of engaging and empowering local communities? Who are the true guardians of the environment? That's a great question. Who wants to take that?
So this wouldn't be a framework at this point, but we certainly try to profile that effort of the local communities and the empowerment that's happening with local communities with true responsible ecotourism. And that as tour operators are asking for that, it is also generating that awareness that there is that demand for it. And with the operators we work with, that they are creating more eco-based jobs and contributing back to the environment and doing a great loop within the environment and that conservation that's happening. So being able to present that, again, it gets more into the storytelling, but there can be data that goes with it. You can just look at the work around mountain gorillas and how that has resulted in conservation of a species that was thought to be going extinct, 30 years ago. And that there's a lot with the lodges, they're very eco-conscious, as well as then the jobs that have been created. And then that the operators going there are offsetting the carbon for going there, and to create that story together with the data. And then when somebody's looking into the eyes of the mountain gorilla and feeling that connection, they know that they are helping preserve and conserve for future generations. I don't know if that's a framework, but I'd like to hear from Kasia too, or Paloma.
Yeah, I know. I love this question, and I think it's a really useful reminder for all of us. Our Thriving Nature, Thriving People plan is based on that premise that thriving communities need thriving nature, and thriving nature need thriving communities, exactly to this point. And we're very much on a learning curve with this. I guess in terms of measurement, two things spring to mind. We send out a survey to our local operators once a year, and increasingly we're asking questions about empowerment of Indigenous communities, either through incorporating experiences that they run, manage, host within our trips, or through, again, employment. So I guess there's an indirect measure, albeit, just one aspect of many, in terms of how our trips are trying to economically empower, but also raise awareness of the communities that are doing just that, protecting those local environments and, helping make us climate resilient. And then on the other side, our charitable foundation, we've just launched a campaign called Wild at Heart, which is about trying to specifically in a couple of our key destinations support those local communities to then protect and restore the nature that is local to them. And so again, in terms of the kind of framework or the measurement, we're looking to get that kind of impact data back from our expert partners, because those guys on the ground are the ones that engage with the communities and really understand how funding can best be utilized to empower them to take advantage of ecotourism, to kind of engage their children, their children's children, on continuing to see a reason to kind of conserve these beautiful environments, if that might be a challenge. So yeah, I think it's something that at Exodus we're really trying to lean into. We know we need to learn from our destination partners, from those communities, but it's something we feel quite passionately about. And yeah, we're just on the start of that journey.
Absolutely. No, and I want to add, that, a lot of the times, a lot of the actions that you do with the climate change, lens, it also promotes, supporting more local suppliers, supporting more local initiatives, and, again, working with those communities. So it goes hand in hand. Once you are an organization that is looking, that has those sustainability sort of ethos and really wanting to give back, I think, it goes hand in hand. So it cannot forget. One thing should not, forget the other. And I just want to add, so for example, for the carbon projects that we do support, it's very important for our carbon projects to also support Indigenous communities, climate justice, clean water, clean, education. So all of these things, it goes above and beyond, because again, they are the guardians of these, very important ecosystems. So again, it's not just about, just the emissions in the number and how much the trees are sequestering, but like, what about those communities that are there, that are guarding them? So how are these projects actually supporting that community development? So that's, part of it for absolutely. So I know we're running out of time, but I'm going to take one more question. So this is, how do you deal with much more nuanced minute data on footprints such as meals, locally sourced beef versus vegetarian dish, and with ingredients that were shipped across the ocean? Very good question. So I know STI Tour Calculator has meals including, but wondering, how do you account for these nuances, especially because there isn't really a global standard on these type of calculations, from my understanding. And yeah, I mean, let me just quickly, answer from our side. This is a challenge that we are looking at. We have a lot more data when it comes to, for example, the US, but we are enhancing our data set. And by, there are sources, more and more sources available that we are looking into to be able to see those nuances between where exactly the food is being sourced, beyond just beef or so, but again, it's still going to be factors. They're going to be factors, and they're going to be, we don't have, obviously right now, the opportunity to go deep into and analyze every single supply chain in food in every destination. Again, it's not a perfect science, but there are better and better data sets available that we are tapping into. And I don't know if Kasia, you have more to say on that.
I was just going to say, again, pragmatism comes in for us.
Yeah.
For us, we don't know whether guests are choosing vegetarian options or meat options in the restaurants they go to, where we do cover those meals, or breakfast. So our proxy is assuming meat only, and then we apply an overlay of the number of guests who have said that they're vegetarian when they've registered for these trips to give the proxy representation. We have a sister company that is a Polar Expedition cruise company. They buy in the food to put on the ship. It's much easier for them then to start to measure how much red meat versus white meat and fish versus plant-based. So it's easier for them to do that more accurately. But again, it's those different levels of pragmatism and proxy as is appropriate.
Exactly. So this is an area that is just going to continue to improve. We are at the top of the hour, and I'm very conscious of that. And so it's been very, very interesting. Thank you, so much, for the attendance, for the speakers, for your insight. I just, want to highlight, again, the theme that we've been discussing, both Krista and Kasia's, your stories is progress doesn't come from waiting until everything is perfect. It's really about starting now and, learning and improving over time and making those decisions based on data. And again, we're here to support you. We have a lot of tools that you can look on our website that we support you to go deeper into this data. We have tools that make it very simple, very easy for you to be able to start measuring your carbon footprint, and we can go down the journey with you if you want to go deeper, right? So we go from the very easy high level all the way down to going to those more accurate data as you go along with your journey. So I also invite you to explore our climate impact portfolio. You can see all the different projects that we are supporting that are part again of this climate journey. And thank you again so much, Krista and Kasia, for your leadership, for your thoughts, and for the work that you're doing, for joining us today. And before everybody goes, we're actually going to put a little questionnaire. I know everybody's kind of leaving already, but we want to know your thoughts on the next topic that you would like to hear in our webinar series. But so there it is. So please, give us your insight. And yeah, so let's just give them, one more minute. And again, any parting thoughts?
I would just like to thank everyone who showed up and with the interest they have, and that we are really recognizing that we're all part of a big network, and together across the world, we're making that difference. And the fact that we are talking about the involvement of the local communities, Indigenous and other local communities as part of that work is really important, so that it's with the local communities, because they are part of the ecosystem as well if you're working with wildlife.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's been brilliant to be a part of this. Thank you so much, Paloma. Great to hear about your initiatives, Krista, and thank you for the questions and engagement from those who are listening online.
Excellent. All right. Well, have a great rest of the day. It's been lovely, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.